Emma stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the overcast sky, her fingers loosely gripping the rim of her tea mug. The soft chime of the wind brushing past the glass was the only sound in the room, save for the occasional ticking of the wall clock. She liked mornings like this, gray, quiet, predictable. It gave her a sense of rhythm, something steady amid the chaotic energy that came with being married into the Montclair family. More specifically, being married to Daniel Montclair, the only son of Patricia Montclair, the woman who had spent the better part of the last 5 years trying to prove Emma didn't deserve her husband. It hadn't always been this way. When Emma and Daniel first started dating, Patricia had been cold, but polite. Emma was under no illusions. She knew Patricia was sizing her up, as she did everyone. Patricia was from old money. Her family had owned properties, sat on boards, and hosted charity galas for generations. Emma, by contrast, had grown up middle class. Her father was a teacher and her mother a nurse. No scandals, no inheritance, no name that would cause anyone to pause at a dinner party. To Patricia, she was pleasant but ordinary. And worse, ordinary couldn't be trusted. In the early days of their marriage, Patricia's criticism had been passive-aggressive. She would make offhand comments about Emma's charming but humble upbringing. She would correct Emma's table etiquette in front of others with a smile that never reached her eyes. "You don't salt soup before tasting it," she once whispered during a formal dinner, loud enough for 3 other guests to hear. Emma never reacted. She had made a quiet promise to herself not to let Patricia ruin what she and Daniel had. Daniel loved her. That was her grounding truth. He wasn't blind to his mother's tactics, but he also wasn't confrontational. He handled Patricia the way someone might handle an unexploded mine, carefully, methodically, and from a distance. Emma didn't blame him. Patricia's approval had been his measuring stick since childhood. He had been raised to win her praise, and now, any pushback from him felt like a betrayal to that lifelong training. Still, he chose Emma. He chose her again and again, through every family gathering, every veiled insult, every icy Sunday brunch. But Patricia wasn't a woman to accept defeat. She saw Emma's quiet strength as manipulation, not grace. She interpreted Emma's kindness as strategy. In Patricia's mind, people didn't just behave well without motive. The idea that Emma could simply be a good person didn't compute. And so, she did what she believed any mother should do when she suspected her son was being deceived. She hired a private investigator. Emma had no idea. Life moved along as usual. Daniel's consulting job required him to travel frequently. He was currently overseeing a project in Chicago and would be away for almost 2 weeks. Emma continued her own work from home. She was a freelance copy editor, a role that gave her flexibility and a quiet space to think. She volunteered twice a week at a local community center and occasionally at a care home on the other side of town. She liked helping out where she could. It made her feel connected to something bigger than herself. Meanwhile, Patricia was growing increasingly restless. She told herself it was intuition, maternal instinct. The way Emma answered her questions felt rehearsed. The way she politely avoided talking about her personal life, Patricia took as evidence she had something to hide. Emma didn't overshare, and Patricia hated that. She prided herself on being able to read people, and Emma was unreadable. She smiled too easily, forgave too quickly, and excused slights that most people would explode over. That made Patricia suspicious. In her world, no one was that serene unless they were hiding something. So she contacted an agency she had used once before, discreet, expensive, and thorough. She asked for someone who specialized in domestic cases. "I don't want photos of her leaving the supermarket," she said sternly over the phone. "I want real evidence if it's there. You'll know what to look for." The investigator assigned to the case was a man named Mark Behrens. Mid-50s, ex-law enforcement, low-key, with a reputation for being meticulous. He took the job without judgment, as he always did. His approach was simple: follow, observe, report. People usually revealed themselves with time, and in most cases, the truth came out in ways no one expected. Emma's schedule made it easy to track her movements. She rarely deviated from her routine. She left home around 9:30 a.m. on her volunteer days, returned by noon, and picked up her laptop for work in the afternoons. On non-volunteer days, she stayed in. No strange men. No rendezvous. Nothing suspicious. Mark started to feel like this case would be a short one. Maybe a paranoid mother-in-law. Maybe just a misunderstanding. But then something shifted. Mark noticed that every Wednesday and Friday, after Emma left the community center, she would take a bus to the far end of town, an area that was quiet, residential, and not particularly close to anything she had previously listed. There, she would walk about 15 minutes to a run-down care facility called Maple Ridge Home for Elders, where she would sign in and spend 2 to 3 hours with an elderly woman in a memory ward. Mark zoomed in with his camera through the lobby window. Emma would sit with the woman, read to her, sometimes just hold her hand. He noted the name of the woman, Margaret Benson. A quick database search gave him more than he expected. Margaret Benson had once been Margaret Montclair, born 1935, declared legally dead in 1994. Mark checked the date twice, sure he had made a mistake. But the records were consistent. A missing persons report filed in 1992. No body ever found. Death certificate issued 2 years later based on presumed death, signed off by none other than Patricia Montclair. Mark's hands paused on the keyboard. This wasn't just an old family rift. This was a missing person case quietly buried under layers of bureaucracy and privilege. Margaret Benson, Patricia's mother, was alive. She had been in this care home for years under her maiden name, with no visitors, no family contact, and no legal acknowledgement of her existence. He didn't know what to do next. The original contract was simple. Watch the daughter-in-law. Report back with findings. But now the daughter-in-law was just a side character in a much larger lie. Mark did what he'd never done before. He reached out to Emma directly. He found her outside the facility one afternoon and introduced himself plainly. "I was hired to watch you," he said, "but I think you need to know what I found." Emma stared at him, wide-eyed, heart-pounding. When he told her the truth, who he was, who Margaret was, and who had hired him, Emma felt her knees weaken beneath her. She sat down on a bench, overwhelmed, the pieces of a puzzle falling into place. She had met Margaret by chance during a volunteer shift. The older woman had been quiet but bright-eyed, and for some reason, she had clung to Emma's presence. Emma had started visiting her separately, outside her regular hours. She had no idea about the woman's real identity, but now she knew, and now she understood why Margaret always froze when Emma mentioned her husband's last name. Emma sat in her living room, her legs curled beneath her on the couch, a half-full cup of tea cooling on the table. The file Mark had handed her the previous day rested on her lap, unopened since he left. Her mind raced, caught between disbelief and the chilling clarity that comes when puzzle pieces finally start to fit. Patricia Montclair had declared her own mother dead nearly 30 years ago. Yet Margaret was very much alive, frail, confused, and forgotten in a care home Emma had visited for months without knowing the full story. The betrayal of it all was too large to immediately grasp. Emma had replayed her encounters with Margaret in her head a dozen times. The way Margaret's eyes would brighten when she entered the room, how she would mumble half-sentences, disjointed memories of the house on the hill or little Patty with her yellow bow. Once, Emma had brought Margaret a bouquet of lavender, and the woman had burst into tears, whispering, that's what she used to plant near the steps. Emma had assumed it was the fog of dementia, a confused tangle of past and present. But now she saw those moments for what they were, fragments of a life that had been intentionally buried. She opened the file. It was meticulous. Mark had included property records, signatures, medical admission forms, photographs, even the original missing persons report. Patricia had claimed her mother suffered from delusions, disappeared after a breakdown, and was likely dead. The court had accepted it. The death certificate had been issued. The estate of Margaret Montclair had been quietly transferred to Patricia over time, legally, cleanly, and without contest. There was even a newspaper clipping for 1994. Socialite's mother presumed dead after 2-year disappearance. The article mentioned Patricia's strength and dignity in the face of her tragic loss. Emma wanted to be sick. She couldn't understand how someone could do that to their own mother. Margaret wasn't dangerous. She was gentle. She got confused sometimes, yes, and she sometimes mistook Emma for someone else, but she wasn't violent. If anything, she was heartbreakingly lonely. And now Emma knew why. She had been abandoned. The rage bubbled beneath her skin, not just for Margaret, but for Daniel too. He had no idea his grandmother was alive. He had grown up believing she died when he was a child. Patricia had told him that her mother had suffered from serious psychological problems and that it had been a difficult but merciful passing. He hadn't asked many questions. Why would he? No one had ever suggested there was more to the story. Emma looked at her phone. Daniel was due to call in the evening. He had a break between meetings in Chicago. She hadn't told him anything yet. She didn't know how. Would he believe her? Would he defend his mother again? Would he shut down, like he sometimes did when the topic got too close to Patricia's dark corners? When the call came, her voice trembled. "Hey, love," Daniel said, warm and tired. "Everything okay? I need to talk to you about something," Emma said. "It's big." There was a pause on the other end. "What happened?" "Your mother hired a private investigator to follow me." The silence grew heavy. "What?" "She thought I was cheating on you." "For God's sake," he muttered, groaning in disbelief. "She told me she was going to look into something, but I didn't think she'd actually go this far." "She did. And the investigator, his name is Mark Behrens, he followed me for a while. But he didn't find anything about me. He found something about your family. Something about your mother." Daniel was quiet again. "What kind of something?" Emma breathed in. "Your grandmother. Margaret. She's alive." The silence on the other end wasn't shock at first. It was confusion. "No, Emma," he said gently. "She died when I was little. My mom, she told me she was ill. She disappeared, and the police." "She's alive, Daniel," Emma interrupted. "I've met her. I've been visiting her at the Maple Ridge home for months. I didn't know who she was until Mark showed me the documents." "You're telling me my mother lied about her being dead?" "Yes. And she placed her in that home decades ago under a different name. She claimed she was dead to gain access to her estate." Daniel's voice lowered. "Emma, are you sure? I have a file. I have her signature on the death certificate, the newspaper articles, the care home records. Your grandmother, she remembers you. She talks about you sometimes." Daniel didn't respond for a while. When he finally did, his voice was hollow. "Send me the file, please." Emma did. The rest of the conversation faded into silence. The following day, Daniel booked an early flight home. When he arrived, he looked pale and withdrawn. He barely greeted Emma before diving into the documents she had printed and laid out on the dining table. His eyes moved quickly but not carelessly. Each new revelation chipped away at the image of his mother that had been constructed and polished his entire life. The death certificate hit him the hardest. He read it 3 times. Signed by Patricia Montclair. Black ink, neat cursive, deliberate. "I trusted her," he whispered. "She lied to you," Emma said, placing a hand on his arm. "And to everyone else." "Why would she do this?" he asked. Emma shook her head. I think she wanted the estate. And maybe she wanted to erase her mother. Maybe she didn't want anyone to know Margaret was still alive because she thought it would ruin her image." Daniel stood abruptly. "We're going to see her." At the care home, Margaret was sitting in the sunroom, staring out the window. When Daniel entered the room, her eyes darted toward him. At first, she didn't recognize him. But then she tilted her head and smiled, her eyes misty. "You look just like your father," she said softly. Daniel's knees buckled slightly. He knelt beside her, tears forming. "Grandma, Patty used to dress you in those little blue jackets," she murmured. "She said boys should always look like gentlemen." He squeezed her hand. "I thought you were gone." "I was, for a long time." Her voice trembled. "But I waited." Emma watched the exchange with tears in her eyes. A connection lost and rediscovered. But the shadow of Patricia loomed over the room like a stain. When they returned home, Daniel sat in silence for a long time. Then he stood and walked to the phone. He called his mother. "I know," he said when she picked up. "I know what you did." A pause. Then Patricia said, "You don't understand." "I understand enough. You lied to me my whole life. You stole from her. You buried her so no one would ask questions." "She was sick," Patricia said defensively. "She wasn't safe. She was lonely, not dangerous. You did it for yourself, not for her. I saved our family's name. You destroyed your own. He hung up. Emma stood behind him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Daniel turned around. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. You weren't supposed to, she said. She spent a lifetime making sure you wouldn't. Patricia Montclair's estate stood like a fortress on the edge of the hills overlooking the city. With its manicured lawn, imported stonework, and an ornate gate that opened only with a discreet call to the housekeeper, it was a monument to control, curated perfection behind which secrets had long been buried. That afternoon, for the first time in their marriage, Daniel and Emma drove up the winding road not as guests, but as people demanding answers. Daniel was quiet the entire drive. He had hardly spoken since confronting his mother over the phone the previous evening. What Emma saw now wasn't just shock. It was a kind of slow-burning fury. Patricia hadn't simply lied. She had erased a person, a mother, his grandmother, and she had done so with such ease that it disturbed something fundamental in him. Patricia greeted them in the front hallway, poised as ever, her pearl earrings in place, her pale blue blouse unwrinkled, her expression unreadable. She did not act surprised to see them. Daniel. Emma, she said, stepping aside. You'd better come in. The living room looked exactly the same as it always did, tasteful, untouched, like a room out of a magazine that no one ever actually used. Emma noticed how quiet it was. No music playing, no television, not even the tick of a grandfather clock. Patricia sat on the edge of the couch like she was hosting a board meeting, while Daniel stood stiffly in front of her, arms crossed. I want to hear it from you, he said. All of it. Patricia looked down at her hands. You already know. I wanted to say it. A pause. Then she straightened her back, and her eyes met his without a trace of guilt. She had been unwell for years. She refused help, refused medication, wandered off one afternoon, and disappeared. The police searched for weeks. I filed the missing person report. When they found no trace of her after 2 years, I did what I had to do. You signed a death certificate, Daniel snapped, knowing she was alive. She was in a state facility under her maiden name. They didn't even connect the records. She wouldn't recognize me. She barely spoke. It wasn't my fault she disappeared into the system. But you didn't go back for her, Emma said quietly. You let everyone believe she was dead, including your son. Patricia's eyes hardened. She was gone. The woman I knew had vanished long before that. What do you want me to say, Emma? That I regret it? That I spent every day in agony over it? Daniel's voice rose. You didn't just let her vanish. You capitalized on it. You gained access to her assets. You moved into this house. You lied in every interview. You made her absence part of your public narrative, the brave daughter left behind. Patricia stood abruptly, her composure beginning to crack. I was raising you alone. Your father had just died. I had no one. The money wasn't just for me. It was for you too. I would rather have grown up in a shack than live off a lie, he said coldly. Emma could see Patricia's eyes narrow. There was something icy and calculated in her tone now, like a cornered animal switching from retreat to attack. You think you're better than me? She said. Both of you. You walk in here, full of outrage, waving files like prosecutors. You don't know what it was like having a mother like that. Always paranoid, always rambling about people watching her, hearing voices. She destroyed my father's last years with her instability. You think I abandoned her? She abandoned me long before that. You had the resources to get her care, Emma said. Real care. You chose not to. You chose to disappear her. She was a problem, Emma, Patricia snapped. One that wouldn't go away. And I fixed it. Daniel stared at her like she was a stranger. You didn't fix anything. You erased her. But she's still here. She remembers things. She remembers me. Then let her stay in the past where she belongs, Patricia said with a bitter laugh. She's already lived her life. You're just opening wounds. Daniel shook his head. No, you buried the truth because it was inconvenient. But you don't get to rewrite it anymore. There was a long silence. Then Patricia's voice turned cold. So what's your plan now? Parade her out in front of reporters? Tell the press your mother is a fraud? You want to ruin everything I built? Emma stepped forward before Daniel could speak. No, we want to make it right. For Margaret. Patricia's lips curled slightly. She doesn't even know who you are half the time. She knows enough, Daniel replied. And she deserves to live the rest of her life with dignity, not forgotten in some back room of a failing care home. Patricia's mask of civility cracked for the briefest moment. Her nostrils flared, her jaw clenched. But then she took a slow breath and sat down again, fixing her gaze on the rug. "You'll do what you want," she said. "You always have." "We're taking her out of that place," Daniel said. "We'll arrange better care. We're filing a petition to reverse the death certificate. You can cooperate or not, but either way, it's happening." Patricia said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than any plea. It was the silence of someone who had lost control. For Patricia, that was worse than being wrong. On the drive home, Daniel didn't speak. Emma kept her hand on his knee, a silent gesture of solidarity. There was a heavy sadness in him now, not just from the betrayal, but from what he had lost without even knowing it. He had missed decades with his grandmother. He had been lied to by the person who raised him. That night, he sat on the porch with a glass of scotch, staring into the distance. "I keep wondering if I should have known," he said finally. "If there were signs." "You were a child," Emma said gently, "and your mother is very good at hiding things. I keep thinking about my 8th birthday. There was this woman at the gate. I thought it was just some random stranger. She was thin, disheveled. My mom called the police before I even saw her face. I never thought about it again until now." Emma sat beside him, wrapping a blanket around their shoulders. "It's not your fault," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "I want to make things right. I want her to have a real family again, even if it's just for a little while." "We will," Emma promised. "You already started." The next morning, Daniel called a lawyer. They began proceedings to revoke the death certificate and re-establish Margaret's legal identity. The process would be complicated, involving court orders, medical evaluations, and statements from witnesses. But Daniel was determined. Emma helped research specialized care homes and found a private facility with a strong focus on memory care and personalized therapy. She visited it herself before even mentioning it to Daniel. The difference from Maple Ridge was night and day. Where Maple Ridge had been understaffed and depressing, this place was full of light, plants, music, and trained staff who greeted her by name. 2 weeks later, Margaret was transferred. Emma rode with her in the ambulance, holding her hand during the ride. Margaret was quiet but alert, gazing out the window as if trying to memorize every turn of the road. At the new home, she settled in quickly. Emma brought her framed photos of Daniel as a child. Margaret touched them gently, her fingers tracing the edges. Sometimes she'd look up and smile, saying things like he used to climb trees like he was born in the branches. Whether or not her memories were precise didn't matter. The warmth in her voice made it clear she remembered something. Daniel visited often. He read to her, brought her favorite pastries, even tried to play old songs she once mentioned. Emma watched as his guilt began to fade, replaced with something more enduring, a quiet sense of redemption. Patricia never visited. She sent no messages, no lawyers, no interference. But Emma knew this wasn't the end of her. Patricia wasn't someone who let go easily. If anything, she was retreating to calculate her next move. But it no longer mattered. For the first time, Patricia's grip on the family had loosened. And in that gap, something real had started to grow. Autumn arrived slowly that year, sweeping through the trees with muted gold and copper leaves that crunched softly underfoot. The city began to prepare for its season of change, and Emma couldn't help but feel that the timing was symbolic. Their lives had changed too, not suddenly, but steadily, like the light shifting day by day until you finally notice you're walking home in the dark. It had been nearly 2 months since Margaret moved into the new care facility, and the difference in her demeanor was remarkable. While dementia still fogged her memory, she now had moments of striking clarity. Sometimes she remembered Daniel's name right away. Other times she called him by his father's. But she smiled more. She laughed. She took an interest in small things, flowers, music, even a lunch menu. Emma had seen firsthand how a compassionate environment could breathe dignity back into someone who had been forgotten. Daniel had changed too. The weight that had crushed him during the first days of discovery had been replaced with a quieter, steadier sense of purpose. He was still processing the betrayal, But now he had a reason to move forward instead of standing frozen in disbelief. He called Margaret every day, even if she didn't always pick up or remember the call afterward. To her, his voice had become a familiar comfort. Like a lighthouse beam, she could follow even through the fog of her mind. The legal process, on the other hand, was as grueling as Emma had expected. Reversing a death certificate required a court hearing, affidavits, and expert testimony. Daniel's attorney had prepared everything meticulously, and Emma submitted a sworn statement along with Mark Barron's full report. The judge, an older man with silver hair and a no-nonsense tone, read the file with increasing disbelief. It's not every day someone walks into my courtroom and asks to prove that a person declared legally dead is, in fact, alive, and not just recently, he'd said, tapping the file. We're talking decades. Still, after reviewing the evidence and confirming Margaret's identity through fingerprint records and surviving hospital documents, the court issued a correction. Margaret Montclair was officially no longer deceased. The legal system had caught up with the truth, however belatedly. The news never made it to the public. Daniel had debated going to the media, if only to force his mother into some form of accountability, but ultimately decided against it. She'll spin it, he had told Emma one evening, sitting beside her on their porch. She'll call it a misunderstanding, or she'll throw Margaret under the bus again. And I don't want her name dragged through another storm. Emma agreed. Some truths were better preserved within the family, even if they burned quietly behind closed doors. Patricia, true to form, said nothing. No apology, no denial, no angry threats. She simply went silent. A few weeks after the court ruling, Daniel received a letter in a cream-colored envelope with his mother's handwriting on the front. No return address. Inside, a single page. You've made your choice. I hope you're satisfied. Mother. No signature. No warmth. Just the cold punctuation of control, as if to remind him that even in disgrace, Patricia would not surrender her pride. Daniel folded the letter in half without a word and placed it in a drawer. That's the last time I let her into this house, he said. Emma didn't ask him how he felt. She could see it on his face, not sadness, not even anger, but finality. He had grieved his mother already. Now he was just letting go of a fiction that had masqueraded as family. As winter crept in, Emma spent more time visiting Margaret. They would sit together for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes just watching birds outside the wide windows of the facility's common room. One day, Margaret turned to her with surprising clarity and said, "You remind me of someone I used to know." She was kind, didn't say much, but always listened. Emma smiled. Maybe that's why we get along so well. Margaret reached out and held her hand. I'm glad he has you. My daughter was always lost. I think she tried, in her own way, but she didn't understand love. Not really. It always scared her. That night, Emma shared the conversation with Daniel. He sat quietly, listening, his gaze fixed on the fire crackling in their living room. She nailed it, he said after a while. That's my mother. Always chasing perfection, always terrified of being vulnerable. I used to think she was strong, but now I wonder if she was just scared her whole life. Strong and scared aren't mutually exclusive, Emma replied. She built a fortress around herself. She just never realized it became a prison. As Christmas approached, Daniel and Emma brought Margaret to their home for a small holiday gathering. It was the first time she'd been in a family setting in years. They decorated the tree together, Margaret adding ornaments slowly, carefully, as if each one held a piece of her former life. When Daniel gave her a framed photo of her younger self holding him as a toddler, she stared at it for several minutes in silence. I remember this day, she whispered. She took the picture. Patricia. Emma watched as something flickered in Margaret's expression. Not quite sadness, not quite joy, just memory. She was only 5 then, Margaret said. She didn't smile much, even then. They ate dinner at the table together. Nothing extravagant, just good food and warmth. Emma couldn't stop thinking about how strange and beautiful it was that something born from suspicion, a private investigator meant to destroy her marriage, had led to this moment of restoration. Patricia had tried to uncover a betrayal, only to expose her own. After dessert, as snow began to fall outside, Margaret leaned back in her chair, and said softly, "This feels like home." Emma's eyes welled up. It was. In the months that followed, Daniel and Emma adjusted to a new kind of life, one that was smaller in some ways, but deeper in others. They no longer attended the social functions Patricia used to host. They weren't invited, and they didn't miss them. Their focus shifted to the quieter parts of living: walks in the park, phone calls with the care team, Sunday breakfast with Margaret. They learned how to create peace, not chase status. Patricia's absence remained like an old wound, closed but still tender when touched. There were no attempts at reconciliation. Emma believed, deep down, that Patricia wasn't capable of remorse. For people like her, the act of admitting fault was more dangerous than the fault itself. It wasn't about healing, it was about control. And once she lost it, there was nothing left for her to give. One spring morning, Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep. The nurse said she had gone with a faint smile on her face, her hands folded neatly on her chest. Daniel held Emma for a long time when they got the call. There were no regrets. They had done everything they could. They had given her a name again, a family, a home. At the small memorial they held in the garden, only a few close friends and the care staff attended. Daniel stood beside Emma and spoke briefly, his voice steady. She was forgotten by the world, he said, but she was never unworthy of love. We remembered her, and we will carry her with us. As the guests left, Emma lingered by the small plaque they had placed under the cherry tree. It read simply, "Margaret Montclair, 1935 to 2024, she remembered. So did we." Daniel came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "She would have loved this." "I think she did," Emma said softly. In the end, they stood there in silence, watching the petals fall gently around the stone. Nothing flashy, nothing curated, just something honest, the kind of life they had chosen, built not on appearances or legacy, but on truth. And for the first time in years, Emma felt completely free.